The wind moved slow that evening, the kind of slow that carries warnings you don't hear until it's too late. Elias Carter, known across 3 counties as the quiet cowboy with the steady hands, rode into Willow Bend with dust on his coat and questions in his eyes. He'd spent the last week helping a ranch family recover from a storm, and he planned only to rest, water his horse, and move on. But life in the West rarely followed a man's plans. The little frontier town looked peaceful enough. Lamps were being lit one by one, casting warm circles of gold along the porches. Shopkeepers closed their doors. Mothers called their children inside. Everything seemed calm. Until he heard the tremble in a young woman's voice. "Sir, please, don't trust the man in black." The words were gentle, almost a whisper, carried on the wind before he even saw her. Elias turned. A girl, maybe 19, stood at the corner of the general store. Her hands clutched a folded shawl. Her eyes, wide and sure, stormed with fear, looked straight into his. He tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am, I don't know who you mean." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "You will. And when you do, walk away." Before Elias could ask anything more, she hurried down the alley like a shadow chased by dusk. He watched her go, an easiness settling in his chest. The West had taught him this much. Warnings rarely came without reason. Elias tied his horse outside the Pine Lantern Saloon, planning only to warm his hands and maybe ask the bartender about the girl. The room inside was soft-lit with lanterns, quiet except for a piano's slow tune. A few ranch hands talked over coffee. There was no loudness, no trouble. Then the air shifted. The door opened behind him. Boots stepped in, measured, heavy, certain. Elias turned his head just enough to see. A man dressed head to toe in black stood in the doorway. Black hat, black coat, black gloves. Even his expression held something shadowed, unreadable. For a breath, Elias heard the girl's trembling voice again. "Don't trust the man in black." The stranger scanned the room, nodded at no one, and walked to a corner table as if he belonged to the silence more than the world. Elias took a slow breath. He wasn't a man who jumped to conclusions. The West was full of travelers who dressed all kinds of ways. Maybe the girl mistook him. Maybe the man meant no harm. But the heaviness in the air told a different story. The bartender leaned in. "Evenin', Elias. Passing through again?" "Just stopped for some rest," Elias replied, his voice low. "Say, that fellow over there anyone you know?" The bartender kept his face still, too still. "No name given. Came 2 days ago. Doesn't talk much. Folks keep their distance." Elias nodded slowly. The stranger wasn't doing anything wrong, just sitting quietly staring at a pocket watch he held in his gloved hand. But something about him, it felt like a cloud before a storm. The way he sat, perfectly still, yet the entire room seemed to bend around him. He whispered, her voice a fragile thing. "Oh no. You spoke." He tapped the pocket watch once, a crisp, metallic sound that cut through the silence, as if marking time that only he understood. He tapped the pocket watch once, a crisp, metallic sound that cut through the silence, as if marking time that only he understood. Before Elias could no name on it, just a single line, written shaky and hurried. "If he asks you anything, say nothing, please." Elias's breath tightened. The handwriting looked like the girl's. His instincts ticked sharp. He scanned the street. The porches were dim, windows shuttered, no sign of the girl anywhere. Only the lamplight's quiet glow and the faint creak of a sign swinging in the evening wind. Why give him a warning? Why him, a stranger passing through? Unless something was coming, something the town felt but didn't speak aloud. His horse shifted uneasily, her ears pricking as though she sensed it too. Elias tucked the note into his coat and headed back inside, but he didn't make it far. The man in black stood right in front of him, close, too close. His black coat brushed lightly in the wind, and the lanterns behind him cast long, dark shadows across the dust. "You're Carter," the man said, his voice calm but cold as a winter river. "I've heard of you." Elias kept his tone even, his hand resting near his side, a habit born of years on the trail. "Don't believe I know your name, stranger." The man's lips formed a faint, unreadable smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You will." He tapped the pocket watch once, a crisp, metallic sound that cut through the silence, as if marking time that only he understood. Before Elias could reply, the man in black walked past him and disappeared into the night, silent as smoke, sure as fate. Elias stood there, chest tight with unanswered questions. Then he heard footsteps again, not heavy, not threatening, soft. The girl stepped out of the alley, her eyes filled with fear and something deeper, something close to sorrow. You spoke to him, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. Oh no. You spoke to him. Elias stepped toward her, his own voice gentle. Miss, tell me what's going on. Who is he? Her voice broke. It's too late now. A cold wind swept down the empty street. One of the saloon lanterns flickered out, plunging them into deeper shadow. And somewhere in the dark, the man in black's pocket watch began ticking louder, or maybe it was just in Elias's mind, a steady, certain, final sound. The sound of a clock counting down to something terrible. And Elias knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he wasn't just passing through Willow Bend anymore. He was a part of its story now, whether he wanted to be or not. The girl's warning hung in the night air like a lantern swaying before a storm. Elias Carter stood still, his hat tipping slightly in the rising wind, studying her trembling hands and the fear that clouded her eyes. Miss, tell me why he matters, Elias said softly. Not out here. She looked around as if the shadows themselves were listening. Please, walk with me. Just a little ways. Elias's instinct was to protect first, question later. He gave a slight nod. All right. Lead the way. They walked down the quiet dirt path behind the general store, where lantern light faded and moonlight brushed the rooftops silver. The air grew colder, quieter. The girl stopped near an old wooden fence, gripping the top rail like it was the only solid thing left in her world. My name is Clara Holt, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I should have told you earlier, but fear. It makes you hide things you shouldn't. Elias simply nodded for her to go on, his own voice quiet. It's all right. Clara took a breath so unsteady it nearly broke. The man in black, he's not here to meet anyone. He's waiting for someone. Who? Elias asked, his gaze fixed on her. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper, the words catching in her throat. You. A wave of cold, like ice water, swept down Elias's spine. He kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Miss, I've never met him. I know, she said, her eyes wide with a genuine terror that was impossible to fake. Clara explained in quiet, careful words. He came into town 2 days ago. Never talked much, never smiled, never got angry. Just sat in that corner of the saloon and watched the door. Elias remembered the stranger's stillness. The way he observed everything without ever looking like he was a predator's calm. Clara continued, her words tumbling out faster now. Folks here tried being polite. Offered him a drink, asked his name. He didn't answer anyone. What did he tell you? Elias pressed gently. That someone was coming. Someone he'd been searching for, he said. He said the moment that person walked into town, time would start moving again. Elias frowned. The words felt like a riddle wrapped in a threat. What does that mean? Clara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off a chill that wasn't from the night air. I don't know, but he showed me something. She reached slowly into her shawl, her fingers fumbling with the fabric, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With a shaking hand, she offered it to him. Elias took it, his movements slow and deliberate, and opened it carefully under the pale moonlight. It was a sketch, a charcoal drawing. Rough, but unmistakable, it was him, Elias Carter. His coat, his stance, the worn leather of his gun belt, even the slight, distinctive notch in his hat brim. It was a perfect likeness, drawn by someone who had never seen him. How'd he get this? Elias murmured, his voice a low rumble. He wouldn't say, only that you would come. That your path was already set. Clara's voice thinned, becoming fragile. I think he means to talk to you about something. Something important. Elias studied her trembling eyes, seeing past the fear to the courage it took for her to be standing here. Miss Clara, why warn me if he never threatened you? She hesitated, looking down at the dusty ground. Then her eyes watered, shining in the moonlight. Because of what he said after showing me your picture, she swallowed hard, barely managing to get the words out. He said, when he arrives, tell him not to run. Tell him I kept my promise. Elias felt the world tilt, just enough to unsettle the soul. A promise? He knew nothing of any promise, miss. You don't know what promise he meant. Clara shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. No. That's why I told you to stay away. She looked up at him, her voice small and desperate. I didn't want trouble following you. Elias let out a long, slow breath. Trouble's been following me longer than you know. The wind softened for a moment, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Crickets stirred in the tall grass nearby. Elias rested his hand gently on Clara's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. You did the right thing telling me, he assured her. And I promise you, I won't let anything happen to this town. Or do you? Clara blinked back her tears, a flicker of relief in her expression. You don't even know me. But I know fear when I see it, Elias replied, his voice steady and low. And nobody should have to carry it alone. Her lips trembled into the smallest, grateful smile. For a single, fleeting moment, there was peace. A soft metallic click echoed down the street, sharp, deliberate, steady. It wasn't a weapon. It was the sound of a pocket watch being opened. Like the footsteps of time itself, marching closer. Clara turned pale, her newfound courage vanishing. He's coming. Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her, a silent shield. From the foggy street ahead, a figure emerged, walking calm, unhurried, as if the night itself widened to let him pass. Lanterns flickered as he passed by them, their light seeming to shy away. His black coat drifted behind him, catching the wind like a shadow stretched to thin. He stopped 10 paces away. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, but his eyes remained lost in shadow. Carter, he said quietly. His voice was not loud, but it carried within unnerving clarity. You read the note. Elias kept his stance steady, his hand resting near his side. I read it. And did she give you the message? She said not to trust you. The man in black gave a small nod, a gesture that was almost respectful. Good. She listened. Elias frowned, the mystery deepening with every word. Why'd you show her a picture of me? Why wait here for someone you've never met? The stranger lifted the pocket watch, its silver surface glinting in the moonlight. He didn't look at it. He looked at Elias. Because I promised a man long ago, he said, his voice softer now, laced with something that sounded like memory. A man who saved my life. He told me, one day, you'll meet my boy. When you do, give him the truth. Elias's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't heard anyone speak of his father in years, not since. Clara looked between them, her expression a mix of confusion and mounting fear. Elias felt his hands go still, a strange calm settling over him. What truth? He asked, his own voice now barely a whisper. The stranger opened the watch. Inside, illuminated by the moon, was an engraving. A name Elias hadn't spoken aloud since he was a boy, a name he thought time itself had buried. The man in black looked up, his eyes finally catching the light. They were weighted with something that looked like sorrow. Elias. I knew your father. Elias's heart shook, a tremor that ran deeper than any fear. Clara gasped softly beside him. And then the stranger added the words that tightened the night around them, pulling it taut like a wire. And he died trying to keep a secret that only I can share. Dawn broke quiet over the valley, painting the world in soft, hazy gold. The cowboy stood alone at the edge of the ridge, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. The wind brushed past him, cool and light, but it felt like a warning, a whisper of something to come. Behind him, in his memory, the girl's last words echoed, "Don't trust the man in black." But it was too late for warnings now. He saw it then, a plume of dust rising on the far trail. It was a lone rider, black coat, black hat. Even from this distance, there was a cold stillness in his posture that sent a shiver down the spine. The cowboy tightened his grip on the reins. His horse, a steady old friend, shifted nervously beneath him, sensing the tension in the air. But the cowboy's eyes stayed steady, fixed on the approaching figure. He thought of the girl, waiting for him back in the small canyon camp. He could picture her now, wrapped in a worn blanket, her eyes wide with fear, praying he'd make it back alive. He had to, for her. The man in black reined in his horse about 10 paces away. The silence that fell between them was heavy, sharp enough to cut. It wasn't hatred that filled the space. It wasn't even rage. It was just the immense weight of old mistakes, of paths crossed and choices made long ago. The man in black finally broke the quiet, his voice soft, almost a sigh. You shouldn't have come. The cowboy didn't flinch, didn't even blink. I'm here for the truth. A slow, painful breath left the other man's chest. There's no truth out here, he said, his words laced with weariness. Only consequences. But the cowboy shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. That girl. She trusts me. At the mention of her, a shadow crossed the man's eyes. It was just a flicker, but it was there a flash of guilt, maybe even pain. "She shouldn't trust anyone," he replied, his voice a low growl. "But especially not me." The cowboy's heart tightened. This wasn't the simple story he'd been told. There was something deeper here, something hidden in the quiet sorrow of this man. "Why are you after her?" he asked, his voice firm but not accusing. Slowly, deliberately, the man in black pulled off his leather glove. He held up his hand, revealing a stark, faded scar that wrapped around his wrist like a brand. "The same men who marked me. They marked her family." The cowboy froze. The ground beneath his boots seemed to shift, the whole world tilting on its axis. He whispered the realization, the words barely audible. "You were trying to protect her." The man nodded, a slow, heavy movement of his head. "But I'm not the man who should." The cowboy swallowed hard, the dry desert air catching in his throat. He finally understood the girl's warning. It wasn't about danger. It wasn't about a villain hunting her down. It was about sorrow. It was about a pain this man had carried for far too many years, a burden that had turned him into this grim, solitary figure. The cowboy's hand, which had been resting near his holster, slowly dropped to his side. It was a sign of trust, a surrender. "You can walk away," he said quietly. "No trouble. No fight." The man in black looked at him, his eyes filled with a profound and ancient tiredness. "I'm not walking away from my past," he answered. "But maybe you can give her a future." With that, he stepped back, turned his horse, and without another word, rode away into the breaking sunlight, becoming a silhouette once more before vanishing into the glare. The cowboy let the silence settle, letting the truth of what just happened sink in. Then he turned his own horse, heading back toward the canyon. Each step felt heavier with the weight of this new knowledge, but strangely lighter at the same time. He had ridden out to face the darkness, and found a sliver of truth hidden right inside it. Back at the canyon camp, the girl was sitting by the dying embers of the fire, her knees hugged tightly to her chest. When she heard the sound of hoofbeats, she jumped to her feet, her whole body tense. Her eyes widened with relief when she saw it was him. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling. The cowboy dismounted slowly, his movements measured. "Always." She stepped closer, her gaze searching his. Is he gone?" The cowboy nodded gently. "He's not coming after you anymore." Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear this time. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The weight of her past was finally lifting. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. He looked out toward the horizon, at the wide-open land waiting for them, a clean slate. "We ride," he said simply, "to a town where no one knows your past." She managed a faint smile, the first one he'd seen on her face. "And yours?" The cowboy paused, considering her question. For the first time in years, maybe even longer, he felt a flicker of hope for himself, too. "Maybe it's time I let mine go," he said. They saddled up. The girl climbed onto her horse, still a little shaky, still learning, but her movements were more confident now. The cowboy rode beside her. He wasn't just a guardian anymore, or a stranger who'd offered help. He felt like something closer to family. As the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, the bright sunlight seemed to wash the desert clean, and the wind carried away the last whispers of danger. The cowboy started to talk. He told her stories he hadn't shared with anyone, stories of old, stubborn ranchers, of brave mothers who held their families together, of small moments of kindness he'd seen hidden in the roughest of places. The girl listened, her eyes fixed on him, as if his words were stitching her bruised heart back together, piece by piece. By evening, they reached a small frontier town nestled in a valley. Warm lanterns glowed in the windows of the saloon and the general store, casting a welcoming light onto the dusty street. It looked like a safe place. It felt like a beginning. The cowboy helped her dismount, his touch gentle on her arm. She took his hand, her fingers soft in his calloused palm. "Thank you for believing me." He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, thank you for trusting me." The girl looked up at him, the lantern light catching the hope in her eyes. "You think he'll ever come back?" she whispered, the question lingering in the cool night air. The cowboy gazed out toward the desert they had just crossed. The sky was settling into a deep purple and gold, the colors of a promise. "I think he already said goodbye." She nodded slowly, a sense of peace finally settling over her. The cowboy took off his own hat and placed it gently on her head. It was too big, but it was a gesture of protection, of comfort. "You're safe now," he said warmly. And together, they stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the town lights. For the first time, both of them were walking toward a future that wasn't shaped by fear, but by hope. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.